This video is going to be talking about the 10 most impactful tricks to score highly in the decision-making section of the UCAT. So watch on because we're going to discuss tricks, how to avoid them, and at the end we're going to talk about the best ways to prepare. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Dr. Ashley Hilton and I've been teaching the UCAT for a long time now. And as you'll probably have seen, I've been doing this series on the most impactful tricks for each of the sections, and today we're going to be looking at the decision-making. If you want to check out other ones in the series, look in the description below where we have links to the verbal reasoning, abstract reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and SJT top 10 tips for each of those. And also stick around for the end where I'm going to show you where you can find a specific decision-making playlist that's going to give you all the lessons you need to score highly. Right, so enough talk, let's just dive straight in with the top 10 most impactful tips. Number one is to be aware of the 6 different types of questions that come up in the decision-making and know exactly how to tackle them. If you don't know what those 6 are, you can check out this video here where I do a decision-making overview that highlights all 6 of the possible questions that come up and exactly how you should go about tackling them. Decision making is one of those sections that combines a variety of skills. So usually I recommend that my students don't attempt the decision making until they've first done their verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning prep. But the good news is that the decision making section actually bears a lot of comparisons with the section 1 of the BMAT. So practicing one will complement the other. One of the common question types that comes up is evaluating arguments. So tip number 2 is going to be a trick for how to tackle them. So when evaluating arguments, it's going to ask you to say which is the best argument to support a statement. And without going into too much detail with a question, because you can check out some of my other videos for that, I want to give you a mnemonic that's going to help you evaluate arguments and decide which is the best one. So for argument sections of the decision-making section of the UCAT, I want you to think of the word reefs, like the Great Barrier Reef. And reef stands for relevance. Is the statement directly connected to the subject matter? Evidence. Is there any proof or is it relying on assumptions? Emotional. Is it free of personal or subjective opinions? The more objective it is, the better. And the last 2 questions I want you to ask are, is it factual and is it sensible? Number 3 is some important advice around the drag and drop yes/no questions that you're going to get. Similarly to the verbal reasoning, you really need to base your answers solely on what is said in the text. Therefore, it's really important that you make no assumptions and don't include any outside knowledge. Also, it's important to note what kind of words are used between the question and then the answer statement. As we discussed in the verbal reasoning top 10 tips, which you can check out here, it's really important to know when you have a language mismatch. And if you don't know what that means, you can check out that video where I describe it in a lot more detail. Tip number 4 is to use your board. The decision-making section is designed to make you want to carry a lot of information in your head at one go, and then it's going to ask you a question based on the wealth of information that they've presented. This is especially true in those single questions where it's a whole problem to solve and you have 64 questions just to pick one of 4 or 5 answers. The information that they present to you is going to be related to each other one way or another. So you might want to draw it out in maybe a chain of progression. Maybe you can draw your own table where columns and rows divide out the set of information that's given to you. And then that loosely ties into number 5, which is draw out schematics. Essentially, you will have questions that are based on Venn diagrams, although they are not actually explicitly drawn as such. So they will talk about things that are overlapping, and the best way to represent those is via drawing your own Venn diagram that's going to help you in your own mind picture what's going on and then work out what information you need to infer based on the question that they ask you. Again, a YouTube video really isn't enough space for me to go through this in detail and show you some example questions, but if you want to check out my online course where we have 20 hours of video and questions with 340 answers and practices that you can go through, you can check that out there, and we go through this type of question in detail, giving you all the techniques that you need to do to succeed and score highly. Tip number 6 is to learn some basic critical thinking concepts. If you have a look at the decision making section, it is essentially critical thinking just played out in question form. And with about 30 minutes of Googling, you can find some free basic concepts of critical thinking explained nicely for you so that you can use that information to carry forward to the decision making section. Number 7 is make sure that you are really solid on skills such as probability, statistics, and Venn diagrams. Although the former two come up in quantitative reasoning a lot, they also like to combine these skills, as I said before, with verbal reasoning type skills as well. So understanding your averages well, knowing how probabilities work, especially if they're combined or dependent or conditional, as they say. These are just skills that if you know them well, you're just going to avoid slipping up and making silly mistakes on some easy points that you could make. Number 8 is to make sure that you keep an eye on the time. The decision making section is not actually the most time pressured, however the whole UCAT is time pressured anyway, so it's still very quick. Now we've talked about my time strategy for this and how important it is to just get through the entire section rather than focusing too much and wasting too much time on ensuring you get 100% accuracy. It's much more beneficial to just have a go at everything. So you'll have 64 questions to either do these long puzzles where you have just one answer to give, or these one statements with 5 yes/no answers, but just ensure you're sticking to that 64 seconds per question to make sure that you complete everything and maximize your chance of getting marks. Remember that there's no negative marking, so even if you're not sure, guess before you flag and then move on, and come back only if you have time. Remember, there are some questions that are designed to be time wasters. So if you feel like it's going to take you long and it's not worth wasting the time on when you could be spending that time gaining other marks, it's worthwhile and probably wise to just flag it, guess, come back, and just save that time and come back to it if you can afford it at the end of the section. Number 9, which has been people's favorite part of this entire series, is the common traps that they lay for you and how to avoid them. The first one is to be on the lookout for the way that they word and present the numbers. Let me give you an example. Let's say if I had a party and I invited 4 people over. I mean, it would be a pretty tame party, but that's how things are in COVID times. But when we say that, so they've invited 4 people and there's 5 in total, including myself. So when they say how many other people are at the party, they are obviously excluding you from that. Therefore, it's important to notice that that is 4 rather than 5. And those are the common tricks that slip people up. And they also present the answers in a way and give you an option that if you get confused, the numbers will add up to make it so. So just be careful when they're saying everybody or everyone else other than, say, Jim, who's invited 4 people, or you who've invited 4 people. Just be wary of the way that they word those numbers to try and trick you out to either exclude or include people accordingly. The second trick is with Venn diagrams relating to how circles overlap. So let's give an example. Let's say we have 10 dog owners and 10 cat owners, and 4 people own both cats and dogs. And what it will probably do is give you the Venn diagram where they overlap and give you the 4 in the middle in that overlapping point. Now, some people will fall into the trap of putting 10 in the remaining area of each cat and dog only, whereas actually it's the 10 of the cat owners minus the 4 of the people who both own cats and dogs, so you take that away to give you 6, and that's what's left to be put in that spare space. The trap that people fall into is double counting that, effectively putting a 10 in that spare space rather than the 6, which means that you include the 10 cats only plus the 4 people that own cats and dogs, giving you 14 total cat owners, which is not what they've stated in the question. The third trap that they try and trick you on is getting you to make assumptions. This usually comes up in the best arguments question, where they want to know which of these is the strongest argument. Now, we have an entire module on my online course dedicated to these questions alone, but essentially if you see assumptions, it will weaken the argument and kind of reduce it as being the candidate for the best argument or strongest argument answer. Remember the Reef's equation that we talked about earlier, and just know that the stronger arguments or best answers are usually going to use evidence and be free of assumptions. The fourth trap is to make you assume that things are necessarily linked. Let's say a stadium is full of fans. Does that necessarily mean that the home team is winning? Probably not, especially if, say, you're a Newcastle fan. It's the one and only Double G. And the final trap to look out for is interchangeable maths terms. For example, they might say a 15% reduction, and then the answer might say 85% of the original, which essentially means the same thing. So that might be something that can catch you out. So just be wary of people saying the same thing but just representing it with different numbers. The final tip, and one that's especially poignant for the decision-making section of the UCAT, is to make sure you attempt some mock papers, and more importantly, go through them so that you can go through all of the answers, whether whether they were right or wrong. It will take you 2 hours to do a mock paper and probably even more to go through it a second time. But it's really important because that is where all the learning happens. That's when you go through things and get them wrong, you remember them because you get a bit annoyed and frustrated that you got those answers wrong. But even the ones that you got right, it solidifies your knowledge. So although you might feel like, oh, I've done the work, I've done that test, why do I have to spend all this time doing that? Just remember that that is probably the gold for where you're going to do most of your learning. So if you want to learn more about the decision making, I've just made a brand new playlist here where I go through all the lessons and things that you need to know. Otherwise, if you want to go into more depth, you can check out my online course where I have over 20 hours with 200 lessons and 350 practice questions with work through answers that you can go through to maximize your efficiency and score in the UCAT. So thanks for watching. Best of luck with the UCAT, and I will see you over in one of those videos.